Hello, hello. Welcome to Unlapped. I'm Nicole Briscoe. Laurence Edmondson is here. Can you zoom in? Can I see your face a little bit?
I don't know if you want to. I don't
You
know if
have
you
some
want to.
chipmunk cheeks going on? You
Yeah,
don't.
a little bit.
How you
A
feeling?
little bit.
For those
Not too bad.
those who don't know, he had his wisdom teeth out. So we gotta make sure he's okay.
Yeah. So I'm not, as you can tell, anybody watching on YouTube, I'm not in Baku. I'm still in London, and so I thought I'd take the opportunity to get some get some dental work done with a wisdom tooth, which at my age is quite unusual, but in this case, it was definitely better now than never. So yeah, one tooth down, but other than that, I'm feeling
Wait,
pretty
just
good.
one?
Yeah, it was only one that went out. Only one that went out. The others were just letting them do their own thing.
Did you have
Um,
anyone in the room with you when you woke up that could record you when you were coming out of the anesthesia?
yeah, I've heard this is becoming a bit of a pop thing.
That's
Fortunately,
the
it was
thing.
just a local anesthetic, so it was kind of just in that area. But yeah, no, I've never done the full. I don't know. Have you done the full anesthesia thing and come out of it? I've never done it, but it looks like it can be quite a lot of fun.
I did the wisdom teeth thing, I think when I was like 19 or 20. No one recorded me though. They loved me. And no, I've had like three knee surgeries in the last 5 years. No one's ever recorded me coming out of anesthesia, which I feel like is probably a mistake. I feel like that is a missed opportunity for some sort of
Well,
blackmail on
I
me.
mean, fingers crossed it doesn't happen again
Oh
anytime
yeah,
soon. If it
hopefully I'm
does,
good now.
we know to send someone in with a camera.
Yeah,
We'll be good.
exactly. All right, listen. We're watching Unlapped. Remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously, thank you. Like this video, like and subscribe, leave us a comment. If you're picking us up someplace else, cool, great. Just hit us up with a 5-star review. But remember, if you are watching on YouTube, we are there all year long. That's where you can get all of our F1 content, including our brilliant producers. I try to be nice to them every week. Our brilliant producers who ask us the most lovely of questions. Because you actually had before you had your teeth ripped out, you actually had a chance to sit down with Oscar Piastri, and talk to him about the title fight, how he's feeling, the quote unquote like battle between him and his teammate. What do you think was like the biggest takeaway that you had from that conversation?
Well, it was an interesting one actually, because the reason I was doing the interview was for a much wider feature about Oscar that we're going to run ahead of the US Grand Prix and trying to get a little bit more of who his personality is. So a lot of it was about actually his history, how he moved to the UK when he was 14 years old, and his dad stayed with him for 6 months and then just left him. And he was at a boarding school. I say just left him, he had everything in place, but he was at a boarding school and doing go-karting. And this was all part of his progress towards becoming a professional racing driver. So, I mean, that was fascinating. And actually, I spent too much time talking about that. But when we got onto the subject of Monza, I was told one question left. So I asked him, how had things gone, and had there been conversations since everything that happened in Monza? And he said there had. And actually, he was fairly similar in how he felt about it as he was when he got out of the car in Monza, which was actually surprisingly okay with it, and kind of
Let's
saying
just
that
like recap what
it's
happened in Monza in case
yeah.
like you forgot. So there was the slow pit stop. There had been basically papaya rules, and they asked them to swap late in the race. Lando got the win, Oscar did not. But after the slow pit stop, it could have been, or Lando finished in front of Oscar, and it could have been the other way around. Um, so he's now saying it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's kind of what he said afterwards as well. So he's happy with where it's gone. There have been conversations about what happens next. They're not really giving too many details of that. Maybe a little bit more will come out on media day in Baku. But one thing I wanted to ask him was, okay, we're at this stage of the season. There's still whatever it was, 8 races left, and you have a call like that come from the team. Further down the line, are you prepared to be more ruthless about this? And his answer was kind of interesting. I thought kind of telling that he said, not at the cost of future success with McLaren. So kind of not completely ruling it out, but also saying that if it upsets the situation at McLaren, if it means the team turns against him, if he does something which he thinks isn't going to be accepted by the team in the long term, or is going to cause damage to his relationship with the team in the long term, then he wouldn't be ruthless in that sense. Of course, very easy to say on a Zoom call between races, with several races left and a 31-point lead in the championship. Could be very different if we're in Abu Dhabi and it comes down to a decision in the final race. But I think, Oscar at the moment is still playing the long game, knows there's a long way to go, but he also knows he's in a good position. So it was very much, saying the right things, playing it all down, keeping cool. He doesn't want this to be a bigger thing than it has to be, I don't think, because the one thing about Oscar, and there's something else I learned from the interview, is that he is able to just cut out all the noise, all the nonsense going around, and just focus on what matters on the track. And I think ultimately that's what's going to win in the championship, above whether he obeys an order or not down the line.
I honestly think that that is not a surprise based on every conversation you've ever had with him, based on every interview I've done with him, based on every interview I've ever seen with him. If you were to say, give me a driver who, besides Max, give me a driver who has the ability to just block out all the noise, there is nothing about the way that Oscar presents himself that doesn't make me think that that's him. However, the maturity with the concept of if I'm going to do something, I know down the line the team needs me and I need the team. So I can't do anything that's going to put my relationship with the team at risk. I do think that that is incredibly mature because you think about it from the perspective of this was a 14-year-old kid who's dropped off in England and at the age of 14 was set up to do something that most people dream of doing. And at the age of 14, he had to start wrapping his head around that and having the maturity back then to make the right decisions to put himself in a position where this was even an opportunity. So now here he is at a young age, after living that life, after making all those decisions, and the essential, like the carrot's right there. It's just right there in front of him, and all he has to do is now go out and grab it. So the maturity to handle that situation in the way that he is, I think it speaks a lot about him as a person, because I think it would be so easy to almost feel panicked, to almost feel like you've got to go out and do something stupid because your whole life has been set up for this moment to win that world championship. And he doesn't. He just seems calm, cool, and collected. I mean, even on the radio in Monza, and obviously when you're watching the broadcast, you don't hear the entirety of the radio message back and forth. But you really did get the impression he made his case about we had said in conversation that a slow pit stop was just racing, but okay. He made his piece, he said it, and then he just did it. So I just continue to be impressed by the way he goes about life, the way he goes about putting his case out there, and the way he goes about race weekends. He seems unflappable, and that is a rare quality, I think, across the board in most people.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be confused with having no emotions at all about these things. He
Right.
says he does, and then this is also something I talked to his boss, team principal at McLaren, Andreas Seller, about, is that he just knows how to control those emotions. He just knows that for the benefit of his whole career and for this championship, it's better to pick the important bits, use it as motivation when necessary, but also just control what comes out. And that seems like a trait of the really great drivers, that obviously every now and again we hear a radio outburst from Max, or, even we've heard them from Lewis along the line as well. But just the coolness and the calmness and the ability to control the emotion or use the emotion in the right way. And then also have this ability, and this is something else Stella talked about, to be fast enough that you can start to compute everything else at the same time, so that when these things do get thrown at you, like you've got to give your position back to your teammate, it's not a complete shock and you're in the middle of a corner and you're struggling to figure out, what you're going to do at the end of the lap. It's just this computing power that's always there, always in reserve. And that's because he's just so capable behind the wheel that he has this excess computing power to be able to make the right decisions in those situations. And that's something that really does stand out among the top drivers. But I think Oscar just has so early in his career, for one, and it just seems like so natural to him. It's not something that he seems to have had to work on. It's just something that comes naturally to him. It's just who he is. And I think that's such a strong trait in any championship battle. And going into this year, we weren't sure exactly how Oscar would react to a
Hmm.
championship on the line. And the same with Lando, because we only saw Lando, get semi close to a possibility last year. It was never really down to the last race. But with Oscar, just the deeper he gets in, the more he gets in, the more difficult situations he faces, the calmness just stays the same. And that I think is a remarkable quality and probably one that's gonna win in the championship, like I said,
I
by the end
I
of the
just
year.
think too, it sets him up for not just this championship, but championships in the future because it doesn't really get more difficult, I think, than when you're chasing your first championship because everything is new.
Yeah.
You've never experienced any of this before. You don't know what it's like until you're in that situation. And there might be different situations down the line where maybe he's not competing against his teammate for a championship. Maybe it's, somebody else. But all of the things that he's in right now are brand new situations, brand new scenarios to work through, brand new, like even the fact that he's winning the way that he is, and then he'll win, and then maybe he doesn't have a great weekend. All of that is just like the fluctuations and figuring out how to deal with it. All of this sets him up too for future success. Who was it that started calling him Baby Max? Do you remember?
I think I
It
might
was
have heard
one.
it from you.
No, I don't know. No, no, it wasn't me, but it was one of us. It was somebody who was like
Okay.
Baby Max. And every time I listen to him now, I'm like, God, dude, like the dude is like Mini Max, like the way he handles every situation, and you can just sort of see it developing more and more down the line. That said, like sometimes you look at him, it's like, I'm not sure I'd want to really have a conversation with you outside of this. I'm afraid you wouldn't really tell me how you feel, but you know what I mean? But you're like, you're a cold-blooded killer. Dude, go get it. I don't care. Like it's just an interesting thing that you see develop in people, and Baby Max is just setting himself up for success down the line.
Yeah, I think it's just being in complete control of everything. I mean, in those conversations, I'm sure if it made sense for Oscar to reveal a bit about, what he's thinking and all that kind of stuff, he would, but he's in
Yeah.
complete control of that. He never seems to say something that he shouldn't say. It never gets away from him. And, that's the same on track as it is when he's talking to the media. And I think, that is something. And what I found interesting, and part of the reason why I'm writing this piece is that last year, if you'd asked about Oscar, I think a lot of people might have been a bit flat about him. They're like, well, he's clearly talented, but I don't really get him. I don't really know him that well. I
Right.
think by being in the spotlight this year, actually, we've learned a lot more. And it's not Oscar. I mean, he does hold stuff back, but this is just who he is as well. This is
Hmm.
just, the kind of guy he is, and also the reason why he's successful. And I think people are really latching onto that. I think people are really getting behind Oscar as the person as he is, as a personality he is. And I think also he has opened up a lot when he first was, around the periphery of F1 at Alpine. He really was quite straightforward and I don't think he enjoyed media at all. And now I think he sees the benefit of it. He sees how he can perhaps not necessarily influence stuff, but he can certainly give a
Hmm.
good impression of himself. That helps further down the line when things go wrong. If you've done a good job at kind of building up this persona that people like, people are going to forgive you a lot more when things go wrong down the line. So I think he just fully gets it. And what we're starting to see is a genuine character in Formula One that perhaps a couple of years ago people wouldn't have said about Oscar.
Don't sleep on him either. I think he's sneaky funny. I remember
Yeah, he
walking
is.
away
Yeah, he's got a
he's
good
like
sense of humor.
really sneaky funny. You know what? It's not even sneaky. Like there are times when he's sneaky funny, but then he's just like funny. Because I remember walking away from a conversation that I had with him in Miami and having genuinely laughed out loud at a number of things that he said. And he's not like that's just part of like his personality. And I think sometimes you don't get a chance to see that unless you've got an extended period of time with him. But I wonder if he becomes more comfortable down the line, if that starts to come out at various points as well. Speaking of things that have come out this week, you know how I love a good sprint race. You know that I love a good weekend of activity because I find all three practice sessions to be a little bit on the mind-numbingly boring side at times. So I like a good race thrown in there. There will be not five, but six sprint races in 2026, including for the first time in Canada, Netherlands, Singapore, and just like little bit of crumbs being dropped from Formula One that they are considering, so the 6 races is in 2026, but they're considering a few changes down the line by maybe doing more sprint races. They've talked about reverse grids potentially being discussed. I'm not sure I like that. Not sure I like the gimmick of that, but I do like the fact that we're getting more sprint races. What do you think?
Yeah, it sounds like in 2027 they'll probably push it up to 12. Nothing's decided, but that would then be half the races would have sprint races and half wouldn't. And F1 look at it, and they have exactly the same view as you. And Stefano Domenicali's been on the record about this, that practice sessions are really only interesting to the real nerds, and I include myself in that group. But even I mean, I would rather watch a competitive
Yes.
session than a practice session. In my opinion, what they should do is probably hit about 12 sprint races. You know, I think it is good. And then I think the other race weekends, they should just cut down to 2 days. So you turn up on, well, you turn up on the Friday and it would be media day, but then you'd have the practice session on Saturday morning and then straight into qualifying and then the race on Sunday. Of course, I don't think F1 will do that because the potential revenue for race circuits of having an extra day of track action is too valuable. But I do wonder sometimes, you know, who's tuning in for for the practice sessions on a Friday, for 2 practice sessions. Um,
I mean, I
yeah,
am, but
yeah, I mean,
not sure I count.
it's part of your job as well, you know. And but
Yeah.
I don't know if I often think if I start working in F1 next year, I don't think I'd tune into those. And as much as I love it, I'd probably keep an eye on what's going on. But would I tune into it? I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what readers say. Comment away. Let us know if you enjoy practice
Right.
sessions or not. But I think when you add a competitive element, certainly if you're at the track as well, and instead of 2 1 hour practice sessions, you have an hour practice and then a quali on Friday night, and then you go into Saturday morning and you're straight into watching some racing action. I've really been getting into MotoGP recently, and they've gone all sprint races or all races,
Yep.
and I think that's an avenue that F1 definitely is going to explore, discuss whether they should go that way. Um, but I actually quite like it. You know, I mean, well, I don't necessarily watch or get to watch all the sprint races in MotoGP, but it's great when they're on and you can just turn on the TV and you've got that action straight up for you. So, and I don't really miss the fact that they have a different practice setup anyway, but I don't miss the fact that, you know, there aren't more extensive practice sessions in the weekend. So, yeah, it will be an interesting one because I think there will be purists and there will be engineers in Formula One that push back against it because
Who
those
cares about the
practice
engineers?
sessions
They're fine.
are useful. Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. This is a very good point about Formula One in general and regulations is that should they be how much should they be set by engineers and how much should they be set by people who are in the entertainment business? And there's a balance, I think. You know, it
Mhm.
is still an engineering sport, an engineering spectacle to some extent, but there needs to be a balance between it being entertaining and it being purely cars, you know, just trying to find the minutiae of setup details so that when they go into qualifying, they're fully prepped. Because actually, it's more exciting sometimes when they're not fully prepped going into those sessions and they're thinking a bit on the fly and the drivers are having to drive around issues. Of course, there are situations where that works against the championship battle and for it, but still, I think having that element of unknown going into a competitive session is a great thing. But yeah, I mean, sad news maybe for anyone who is keen on going to Austin, in that Austin has got the sprint race this year, but it won't have it next year.
Yeah.
So I know the US fans going who enjoy the sprint, that won't be such a thing. But if
But
you're one of
Miami
those
has
fans
it
who love
and
the
Canada has
practice,
it.
yeah, that's true. At least it's staying in North America. So
Right.
that's something. And then also interesting on the Canada one, something that F1 was just keen to make sure everyone was aware of, and something that we had talked about previously is that Canadian Grand Prix usually starts at 2 p.m. It's going to start at 4 p.m. to try and create a window. I know weather can get in the way and everything, but try and
Yeah.
create a window for the Indy 500 to play out, finish, and then the Canadian Grand Prix to start, because they're both happening on the same day in the same time zone next year. And I know for a few fans that was considered a little bit sacrilege having, you know, a North American Formula One race. There's not many on the calendar clashing with the Indy 500. But yeah,
Yeah.
another little update on where the calendar is for next year.
I appreciate the fact that they're attempting to they're acknowledging the fact, because I think, and we talked about this when the calendar came out for 2026. There are people who watch the Indy 500 and won't watch another IndyCar race the entire season because the Indy
Sure.
500 is a thing. It stands on its own. So to take that race and to put it up against anything else felt a little, one, you're like, man, how big is the ego in Formula One? Or two, you're taking something away from your fans. You're taking an opportunity away from your fans. Because I always loved, like, that's the greatest day in motorsports. I prefer the first two races to the last one. But in the
Mm.
US, you've got, you'd wake up in the morning and you'd get Monaco, and then you'd have the Indy 500, and then you'd have the Coke 600. But like when Ryan was racing the Indy 500, we'd wake up in the morning and you'd throw on the Formula One and you'd watch that and you'd sort of like let that calm your nerves a little bit and just like kind of get you in the mood for the day. And then you go through the chaos of the Indy 500 and then you'd sit down and inevitably be having some sort of beverage and you'd be watching the Coke 600. It's just that was how the day unfolded. So there's part of me that's really going to miss, even if I don't have the middle chaos in my own personal life, there's part of me that's going to miss the traditions of that. And I hate the fact that as a fan, I now have to pick if I want to be in Montreal or if I want to be in Indianapolis, because you can't possibly sort of like be in the space to watch them both all on the same day. Because that is an opportunity, like in terms of a North American event, I could go to both and I can't do that anymore. They're on the same day. But I appreciate Formula One's like, no, we're going to try to create a window because there was an ego part of it where you and I discussed this when the schedule came out. We
Mhm.
were like, how big is Formula One's ego? How big is it that they'll just be like, no, screw it. We're going to put our race when we want our race, and then you're just going to see how it plays out. So I appreciate the fact that that's going to happen. Speaking of IndyCar, this has been a topic of conversation for years now, particularly in light of the fact that Cadillac was coming into the sport with Andretti for years, trying to make it happen. And obviously, there is still the Andretti involvement, even if it's more driven by Cadillac. Colton Herta's name has been attached to this venture for years, and the holdup has always been, and still is, I guess to some degree, the fact that he doesn't have the super license points. You just can't get them without finishing in the top three in IndyCar. So some changes on the IndyCar side. Will Power is going to Andretti. The seat opened up because Colton Herta is going to F2. And did you hear him on the podcast where he was talking about this is essentially an effort for him, like his dream since he was yay big was to race in Formula One. And the only way for him to do this is to take a step back from IndyCar, go race F2 and see if he can make that happen. So that's what we're going to see next year. Colton Herta in F2 in the Cadillac family, attempting to maybe get the seat someday.
Yeah, I didn't actually hear the podcast, but I need to go back and listen to it because I think this is interesting. I think it's brave as well to do this because he's
Yeah.
25 years old,
Mhm.
which in any normal walk of life is still very, very young, and in reality is young. But in the world of Formula Two, Formula One, making your debut in Formula One, it's now or never. You know, he needed to make this decision, and he is really keen to pursue F1 and has been for some time. He did a McLaren development test back in the day. I think it was at Portimao. Looked pretty quick, but because of the way that the F1 super license points are weighted towards all the FIA junior series and less so IndyCar,
Yeah.
it's quite remarkable that a 9-time winner in IndyCar doesn't have a super license or isn't considered good enough in the eyes of the FIA to have a
I
super
know.
license. I think, you know, that's a clear oversight in the way that whole system works. And when you have point systems, that often happens. But if he is competitive in F2, then he will easily get the 5 points he needs to complete the 40 to go there. Also, if he does some FP1 sessions, which I imagine he will as a test driver for Cadillac, that's 1 point every time he goes out in one of those. So I think he's going to get to 40 points by the end of next year. The bigger question then is how he's got on in F2 and how competitive he looks. And that shouldn't be overlooked as something to do, to go from IndyCar, which is an incredible series in its own right, you know, with a skill set that I think many F1 drivers would struggle to adapt to immediately, to go the other way and into F2, which also is a series that is pretty random at the best of times. You know, it's often the case that drivers will go there and there'll be various reasons why they couldn't quite get it together. You only have to look as far as Kimi Antonelli and Oliver Behrman last year.
Yeah.
Both went to Prema, considered one of the best teams in F2. Prema just had a really bad year getting used to a new car. and neither driver shone, yet they both still made the step to F1. So there's so many other factors going on. But I think those that know and those that are part of the team that Herta ends up at, wherever it is, will be able to get a picture of what level he's at, where he is compared to the other F2 drivers. And then I think that will ultimately dictate whether he goes to F1. But we talked about this before, whether Cadillac needs a US driver. And I agree with everything that Graham Loudon said on this subject, which is that it's got to be on merit. If he's good enough, if he shines in F2, and obviously if he gets super license points, which I think he will, then sure. But he has to be good enough. But fair play to him for saying, look, I'm going to leave IndyCar, somewhere where he's had, a reasonable amount of success, and go across and just try and make that F1 debut, because that's a big, big, big life decision at 25 years old.
A massive life decision at that age, because you think about the people he'll be up against in F2. He's going to essentially be geriatric in comparison. I mean, look at how young Antonelli and Behrman are still now this season in Formula One. So yeah, it's a massive life decision. We talked about this too. I don't believe they need an American in the Cadillac team. I don't. I think if I'm going to cheer for a team, I'm going to cheer for a team because I like the team. I like their drivers. I could care less if they're an American or Spanish or English, or that's not what's going to make me cheer for a driver or a team. I do think it would be, I do think if, let me go back. The one thing that I think would be different about this particular situation is if you look at the feeder system into Formula One for the last several years. Alexander Rossi was there, came over to the US, won the Indy 500, and people were like, who is this person? Because he grew up racing in Europe. If you look at Jack Crawford, same situation. If you look at, oh my God, Logan Sargent, I'm like, why is my brain going blank? Logan Sargent. Those are American drivers, but they didn't race here growing up. There isn't sort of like a book on them for American fans. Now, if you are deep into the system, you might know them, but there isn't that like built up fan base. So Colton is sort of doing it in reverse. One, his dad raced here. Brian Herta was part of that, really those cool years with Andretti where they were basically winning everything with Kanaan and Franchitti and Dan Weldon. And, he was part of that mix. So there is a tie to Colton because of his dad, but then also just watching Colton come up through IndyCar the way that he did. So he has, in a way, a built-in fan base, built-in name recognition that those other drivers don't. And it could be interesting to see if that is the thing that helps maybe unlock that part of the American base, the American fandom that doesn't exist when it comes to the other drivers. There is a recognition, there's a name recognition, there's even just like the face, hey, I know that guy. Why do I know that guy? So that's maybe the only benefit to doing this in reverse, that it could be like sort of an interesting social experiment. We'll see. But I also think it'll be very interesting to see how he does in F2 next season, because he didn't finish in the top 5 in IndyCar this year. And with Formula 2 being as sort of hit and miss as it can be, what happens if he goes to F2 and is just crap? That's the world that we have to live in.
Yeah, and I think actually it won't, early on I think it's going to be tough, because the whole way F2 is set up is as a feeder series to F1, so that he will learn some crucial stuff there.
Right.
But it means getting your head around Pirelli tires, and they're, being designed to basically degrade during a race and make the race exciting in that way. And like you said, not only is he going to be up against kids who are younger than him going through into F2, or most of them, but also kids who have probably been through Formula 3, where you get that first sense of the Pirelli tire. And then also he'll be up against drivers who have been in F2 for sometimes 2, 3, sometimes 4 years. Guys do hang around. And so it's quite easy to look pretty average, even if the underlying talent is there, but you just got to get your head around some of this stuff. And I don't know enough about Herta, if I'm completely honest, to know whether he's been a particularly quick learner in IndyCar. But if he's going to succeed in F2, he's going to have to learn really quickly. He's going to have to adapt really quickly. But if he can do all of that, those are all things that are going to work for him in F1 as well. So Yeah, it'd be fascinating to see how it goes. And actually, I wish there was more of this. I wish there was more movement from IndyCar to, I mean, ideally Formula One rather than Formula Two, but between the two series, and there was a better way to build up, name recognition on both sides
Yeah.
of the pond, because I think it's actually beneficial to both series, and often the two series kind of pitch themselves against each other a little
Mhm.
bit too much,
I
like
hate
we were
that.
talking about with Indy 500,
I
Canadian Grand Prix. And
yeah.
it's motorsport, and
No.
motorsport is fantastic, no matter which side of the Atlantic it's being raced on, no matter exactly what
Mhm.
the track looks like, whether it's an oval or whether it's the Monaco street circuit. All of it is fascinating in its own right, and I think actually the drivers have a huge amount of respect for each other
Yeah.
across those lines as well. So the more this happens, I think the better. And fair play to Herta for making it happen and being one of the drivers brave enough to make that step. We've seen quite a few drivers go the other way, it has to be said, from either F1 and not making a career in F1 and going to IndyCar, or
Fernando
even just
Alonso,
F2.
Roman Grosjean. Who else am
Yeah,
I?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And even F2 drivers going across as well. So the more of it, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the stat of the week. It is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. The stat this week is more of a number, like a target, if you will. And I'm not at all surprised that we are already having this conversation given the success of McLaren this season. But the magic number this weekend is 9. That's all McLaren needs to outscore Ferrari by, and they can already clinch the Constructors Championship this weekend. Now, there's me personally who's like, thank God it's only the Constructors Championship and not the Drivers' Championship that's being clinched this weekend. But they just need to finish in either a combination of first and second or first and third, and it actually won't matter at all what Ferrari does in this race. Um, if they are crowned champions, it will be the earliest ever in F1 history with 7 races left that after this weekend that this is what we're talking about. So here we go. Yay, McLaren.
Well, I mean, what I find so impressive about this, and because it is quite easy just to be like, people don't get excited about the Constructors' Championship anyway, and it's even more boring when it's been decided this early. But it just underlines what a brilliant job McLaren has done, and
Uh-huh.
I don't think that should get lost in potentially controversial finish to the season between their two drivers in the Drivers' Championship, or more incidents like Monza. What shouldn't be lost is what a brilliant job McLaren have done. Because if you rewind to last year, this same championship, the Constructors' Championship, went down to the final race of the final season, even the final few laps of the final race of
Did.
the season. And that to make that step from being basically level with Ferrari, level or perhaps behind the fastest Red Bull in Max Verstappen. But of course, Red Bull didn't have a 2-car team to be able to take the fight to the championship last year, and haven't again this year. But to be able to do that and have that balance across the 2 cars is impressive. I know it's probably going to be a footnote if they win it this weekend, or if they win it at the next round in Singapore. But wherever they do it, it has been a remarkable season from McLaren.
Yes, indeed. It's a foregone conclusion. Let's talk about the race this weekend. What can we expect? First of all, let's just go back to the track itself. What is this track like? What should I expect? Track nerd me out. Let's go.
It is a weird and bizarre circuit because it is a street circuit, and at parts it resembles Monza with really long, flat out, wide straights, and at parts it resembles Monaco with a section around a part of UNESCO heritage city wall, which I don't think happens anywhere else in Formula One or pretty much any race circuit in the world. It skirts around this UNESCO heritage site. And at that point, at turn 8, the track is only 7 meters wide. And remember, the Formula One cars themselves are 2 meters wide. And it's a switch left, right, left as well. So it feels even narrower for the cars as they go through it. So really weird, and actually quite a hard circuit for the drivers and the teams to get their heads around, to get the cars set up on. But we do seem to have either amazing races there because something triggers a safety car, and then all the tire temperatures go down, and then it's all chaos when it restarts, and then we might get another safety car, and then we get a weird order, and we get cars out of position, and we get fantastic, bizarre, very entertaining racing. or it can be a bit dull if nothing really triggers. There's no spark, no catalyst to get the race going into a wild direction. So it can go both ways. But Pirelli are trying this year. They've brought some softer tyres along in the hope that it encourages people to two-stop. But I think we'll have to see how the tyres are getting on in practice before we start making conclusions as to whether anyone will do that, because it's usually a one-stop.
You know how I feel. I'm always team chaos. Like let
Yeah.
it rain, have there be some sort of like weird situation. Team chaos. Let's mix it up a little bit. Though we did have, I think there was a bit of, we can consider it a bit of a mix up wasn't last week, it'd have been the week before with Monza because McLaren didn't win the race. That was a Verstappen win. And I think it may have been a bit of a surprise. It's hard to look at any Verstappen win and be like, ooh, that's a shock because again, it's Max. However, given the success that McLaren has had this season, I think we go into every race weekend expecting it to be a McLaren win. And then it's like, who else is going to finish on the podium? Is there any reason to think that this weekend is not the same thing?
So I think, like of all the circuits that we're going to over the rest of the season, this is probably one where if you're quick at Monza, you might still stand a chance in Baku. And the remarkable thing about that Verstappen win, it wasn't like Suzuka where he just won completely against the odds, pulled off an amazing qualifying lap, and then held on in the race. In Imola, okay, he started to have a little bit of advantage, but in Monza, it was a huge advantage. And that's the first time we've seen anyone have that over McLaren this year. So like you say, a pretty unusual race. I suppose there was Canada with Mercedes, which was a one-off as well. But I think, yeah, that combination of very long straights and then actually being able to get the car rotated into corners, that's what Verstappen seemed to be able to unlock in Monza, where other drivers couldn't. And what will be interesting from a Red Bull perspective is how much they're able to do that again, because there was some talk after that race that this was basically a new setup direction the team had been able to take, and it helped having Laurent Mekies there asking the right questions, pushing the engineers in the right directions, and ultimately listening to what Max was saying and going with some perhaps things that they wouldn't normally have done with setup, but Max was suggesting and they went with it. So look, if they can get the car dialed in, we know how good Max is, and he could potentially win there. One interesting stat I came across while researching Baku earlier this week is that there's been 8 races there since Formula One started racing in Azerbaijan, and they've been won by 7 different drivers. And the only multiple winner is a man called Sergio Perez, who will not be on the grid this year, but will be next year with Cadillac. But no one else has won it twice. So yeah, kind of something to aim for Max this year. But of course, we shouldn't be ruling out McLaren.
Right.
I think, my gut instinct would still be that they'll be the fastest car there, just because they have been so competitive everywhere. But I think there's a real reason to look at Max and say there's a potential victory on the cards again.
There were some interesting comments after Monza, frankly, out of Toto Wolff, and sort of looking at, there were earlier in the season we were looking at Kimi Antonelli and being like, this is amazing. He's far and away the best rookie. And even when we were saying those things, I think there were parts of us we were like, wait, hold on. It's going to be like this. He's still a rookie. He's a very young rookie. There are going to be mistakes that are made. And all along, it has seemed like Mercedes has just sort of not blindly, but they've had his back without reservation. Then came the comments after Monza where Toto was like, yeah, he's underwhelming. And it was the first time that there was sort of that crack in the armor where you thought, okay, well, they're admitting to the fact that it's not been amazing. First of all, let's just go with that art. Were you at all surprised to hear him say that about Kimi? Just like, yeah, he's underwhelming.
I was, because a week earlier in Zandvoort, he'd defended Kimi so much and kind of put forward all these reasons why he
Right.
was struggling. And the Zandvoort performance, I thought, was quite a bit worse than what happened in Monza. Okay, the fact that he beached the car in the gravel in consecutive races during practice was obviously a knock-on thing that happened in Monza. But, the way he took out Leclerc in Zandvoort, I thought would be the time when you'd be like, that was underwhelming. That should not have happened. So I think Wolf is quite carefully kind of managing the situation with Antonelli. But I also think it is healthy that he's treating him like perhaps he would another driver. There were times when Valtteri was at Mercedes and similar comments were made about him when he just went missing on certain weekends, just wasn't competitive. There were other weekends when he was right up there with Lewis Hamilton and the team would praise him for that. But when his performance wasn't there, the team said it. And I think it is important that team bosses are realistic about it. They don't just keep defending drivers over and over again, because I'm not sure really where it gets anyone. But I was just surprised because how quickly that 180 came from one week to the next. But
Yeah.
I think it is healthy that, there's, as long as it's constructive criticism, as long as it's not just hanging a driver out to dry, but kind of saying, actually, we do expect a bit more and holding him to the same level that they expect from Russell or any driver. I think that's important. And another thing that Wolf has said recently is that the mistakes that Antonelli made this year is kind of forgivable because, or it's easier to forgive because they're not in a championship battle for the constructors or for the drivers' championship or anything like that. I think as of next year, when we're expecting Mercedes to be very competitive, the spotlight's going to be really turned on Antonelli. And if Wolf is just starting to kind of say, look, this is what it's going to be like next year, we're going to have to be honest about these things when they go wrong, that's probably not a bad thing, so that Antonelli doesn't have a complete shock when he gets into 2026 and the spotlight's even brighter.
That's actually how I took it. I think a little bit. It did seem at the moment like an abrupt like 180, because again, it was back-to-back weekends where, like you said, he just really had his back, and then the next weekend it was sort of not. But it does feel like a slow transition into a more realistic set of expectations. So he now has the rest of the season to maybe adjust to some of the other things that are going to come with him next year. And that's the thing. You put somebody in a car who's a rookie, you expect to have things like this. You put somebody in a car who's a rookie, you expect them to make rookie mistakes. You expect them to maybe not be able to have the broadest of shoulders at times. And unlike other teams that don't seem to have their drivers' backs, Mercedes does. And I do think that they are setting him up for the future in a way that maybe Alpine have not been supporting their younger drivers. Obviously, they see something in Kimi where they're like, yes, he is the future of our team. We're going to build on him. He's got the talent that he needs to really succeed in this sport, so we're going to support him. We're going to make sure that he's able to handle the criticism when it comes time for him to actually be criticized. And I do think it's sort of this gradual shift. But also, you hit the nail on the head. Mercedes is going to be in the championship fight next year if they have all the things go according to plan. And I think that that's the way that everyone sort of feels about them. So you should be under different expectations. You should be able to handle the things that McLaren drivers are handling this year. So we can't always have your back. We're going to have some very tough conversations with you. This is a part of growing up in Formula One. It was abrupt from one weekend to the next, but it is sort of maybe a switch in how they're exposing him to things as they go down the line. Do we have any movement on Yuki? Do we have any idea what's going on there?
So there's been some stories this week, I think from Automotor and Sport in Germany, which is usually reliable, that Isaac Hadjar is basically all but confirmed to take Yuki's seat at Red Bull next year. But from what we've heard and what the music's been so far is that Yuki does still have a few races left to turn this around, with kind of Mexico Grand Prix or Austin, Mexico, kind of around October time being where they start to make a final decision. But I mean, Yuki, there was damage to the car in Monza after he had contact with a couple of drivers. And then also he was running an old floor there, whereas Max got the new floor on the car, which seemed to bring it alive a bit more. So the frustrating thing with this whole Yuki situation is that I think everything is seemingly working against him at once. His car does always seem to be a couple of updates behind. I know Checo Perez fans will be shouting at their computers and saying, well, it was the same it was the same with him. And, and it is the way that Red Bull do seem to run the two cars. But he's got that going on. And then Hadjar, meanwhile, is performing at an exceptional level. And it's all just that pressure kind of on his shoulders. And he just doesn't seem to be able to get what he needs to get out of it. So, right. I mean, I I saw those reports earlier this week that Hadjar is going to get the seat next year. And to be honest, first glance wasn't surprised, but it sounds like it's not yet final. But I think it's absolutely going that way. And then what happens to Yuki?
That was where I was. Yeah. What
Yeah,
happens
I
then?
mean, Alpine would be potentially a landing spot. I think the really unfortunate thing about this for Yuki is that even if you rewind about a year ago, and certainly I think he re-signed with, or Red Bull took up their option with him around the Canadian Grand Prix last year. Around that time, there was lots of interest from lots of teams. Now those teams either have drivers in place or the interest has waned because of what's happened at Red Bull. But this is the nature of F1. You have to be competitive in every scenario for your stock to remain high enough for teams to, invest in you to put that contract on the table, to put them in one of your cars, one of their cars. The pressure is so high, and I think for Yuki, it's all just falling apart at the wrong time.
I do want to get your thoughts real quick on the point system and the penalty points.
Mm.
Because there were a couple of things to keep in mind. One, Williams managed to successfully overturn the Sainz penalty with the Liam Lawson Zandvoort thing. We talked after Zandvoort, and wait, was it you and me or me and Nate? That doesn't matter because we were all sort of like, I wasn't sure I got it in the moment. I wasn't sure I understood why that penalty was there, but they did get it overturned. Also, there is Williams sort of on the cusp of, it seems a little bit like the last couple of races where both drivers have been near getting in the points, or they have both been in the points. There's been some sign stuff in there, but they've been a bit up and down. That seems to be them kind of knocking on the door of finding a bit more consistency, even though they basically turned off everything for 2025 and are focusing on 2026. So there's finding consistency with the drivers within those parameters. Then when it comes to the penalty points aspect of it, Ollie Behrman is only 2 penalty points away from a race ban.
Yeah,
Like, I'm not
he
really
needs to be
like
careful.
Ollie, just, rein it in a little bit. Do you think that that's something that could be a talking point this weekend, the penalty point situation?
Yeah, I think it definitely will. So Williams had what's called a right of review, which is basically, they
Right.
have to bring new evidence to the same stewards to try and convince them, first of all, just to open up the case again, and then to change their mind. And so with the Sainz one, which we all looked at and we thought, well, that doesn't look like it should be a penalty. I understand why under the driving guidelines you might give a penalty, but it doesn't look like it should be. And so Williams were able to get this overturned, which very rarely happens. The amount of stories I've written in the last kind of 5 years or so where teams have attempted to have this right of review and just got nowhere, just been chucked out almost immediately. But they brought two camera angles that weren't available to the stewards when they made their decision during the race. One was the rear-facing camera from Liam Lawson's car. The other was 360 camera from Carlos Sainz's car. And that showed that Lawson kind of lost a bit of control mid-corner. And while Sainz didn't really have a right, as per the guidelines, to be in the
terms
park
of
track
where he was.
he still probably had an expectation that Lawson wasn't going to lose control. And therefore, they decided that it wasn't Lawson's fault, but it wasn't predominantly or wholly, or Sainz wasn't predominantly or wholly to blame, which is what you need to give a penalty. It was, in fact, a racing incident, which I think everyone, when they first looked at, felt was the case. So that's kind of good in a way that the stewards are able to admit and put their hands up when something is wrong and change it. It's also good for Sainz's penalty point haul because he had got 2 penalty points for that, and that brought him up to 4 in total. He's now back down to 2. But the kind of downside to all of that, of course, is that if you have these reviews 2 weeks after the race, it's not going to impact the result. I mean, if you were to minus the 10 seconds that Sainz had added to his race time, he still would have finished in the same position. But still, I think there needs to be it needs to be a way that these penalties are done properly, and you can't have a situation where it gets overturned 2 weeks later, but you can't actually change the result. Because if that had been for a victory, then I think you're opening a whole different Pandora's box full of stuff that you don't really want flying around.
They
So
need to get they need to
I,
get to a point where when they have reviews, they have questions. It isn't, you need to know when the race ends that this is the result.
yeah,
You can't have
exactly.
things overturned hours later. Like, I mean, last year in Austin, Like
Yeah, that's a
the
good point.
whole thing changed on us hours later. And it puts everyone in a box. It puts fans in a box because sometimes you can just wake up in the next morning and be like, wait, what? I
Yeah.
thought Lewis Hamilton was on the podium. Nope, not anymore. Disqualified. They need to get to a point where when the race finishes, within a reasonable amount of time, you actually know what the official results are. And then
Yeah.
that's
And yeah, and this is an issue that's been around F1 for so long, and it is almost impossible to solve because they've tried to bring in these guidelines of how you go racing and where the two cars are at the apex, and then extrapolate decisions from that. And in a way, that is consistent because you are dealing with a set of guidelines, but then you get these anomalies of situations that were basically never written around, situations that were never expected when the guidelines were put down. So I think and I said this, I think, on the last podcast as well. The only way to really kind of move towards a better solution is to have four permanent stewards who are able to, start to make decisions that make sense throughout the season and a
because then there's
consistent
consistency.
season without having to refer solely to driving guidelines. Just four guys that you really trust, or girls as well, that you really trust and can and can make proper decisions. So hopefully that is something that F1 considers again going forward. It's something that has been on the table for a very long
Yeah.
time, but never been taken up. But ultimately, for whoever those stewards are, and whether they're rotating or not, incredibly difficult decisions to have to make. And I was proven by that. But as will also be the case, as you mentioned, if Ollie Behrman gets himself into trouble
Mhm.
on track this weekend, or I think for another couple of races at least,
Yeah.
he faces a race ban. And of course, that then puts this other element to it all, as we found out last year when Kevin Magnussen got a race ban for Baku and Ollie Behrman subbed in. So these things do happen, but yeah, we'll have to see how that all plays out.
All right, let's wrap this up a little bit because podium predictions are important and we like to be feisty with each other. I appreciate consistency and I appreciate the fact that I basically had the lead in our little mini championship from the beginning. However, sir, you were only 2 points behind me. Nate is also playing, but he is within striking distance if he were to get a trifecta. We get 1 point for every podium spot we predict correctly, but we do get the magic bonus of 6 whole points if we get the podium correct exactly. That has not yet happened this year. You were the only one that picked up a point in Monza, though, because you said Lando second. So congrats, sir. I have 16 points. You have 14. Nate has 8. Nate is like landing in Baku, like we'll just say now for the purposes of where we are. So he was too good to join us. He's gone with Oscar, Leclerc, Lando, top 3. I have written down my predictions. They're there. I promise. What's
Okay,
up? What are you taking?
I didn't see them, so that's good.
This is like random proof because the number of times we've been like, well, that's the same.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Okay, I'm gonna mix it up a bit. I don't think this is what you're gonna go for. So I'm gonna go with Lando Norris victory,
Okay.
because I don't think any of us three are gonna go with that. Max Verstappen in second place, building on what I was saying about Red Bull's performance in Monza going forward, and then Oscar Piastri in third.
I just switched Oscar and Lando. That's all I did. I still
I
have Max in
really.
second. Uh-huh. I have
So I mean,
Oscar.
there's lots of reasons to do that, and that's what initially came into my mind.
Uh-huh.
But I'm going to go with Lando to get a few points back. Again, I sometimes I'm optimistic with this just for the championship because I want this championship to go down to the wire. If Oscar takes another 10 points out of him, then we could be
I know.
finishing up in Vegas.
Which could be fun for us in terms of
That's
us
true.
being there. Because
Get in
wait,
the
didn't
ground.
Max win the championship in Vegas last year too?
He did. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Because I
Again,
had
Lando just faltering as the season went on.
Yeah, I had a very well lubricated Max Verstappen on the set with me at like 3 o'clock in the morning in Vegas. That's what I remember.
Well, that would be fun. If we get Oscar after a few beers
That would be
on the set with
tremendous.
us,
That
then
would
we
be
might get some
great.
really interesting answers.
Yes. I also think I had God, who else did we have on the set with us? Because we were live for a while post Vegas and it was funny to watch just as they were doing their media stops, just seeing how much sloppier, which sloppier they were getting. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna go with Oscar. Then I'm going Max. Then I'm going Lando. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
All right. I hope you feel better. I hope
Thank you
your
very
mouth
much. Appreciate
starts to
it.
like, yeah, whatever. You really can't tell. Maybe
Yeah.
ever so
Well,
slightly. Ever
yeah.
so
Yeah.
slightly. Remember, if you are watching us on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel, awesome. Thank you. Like, subscribe. We're here all season long, all year long for all of your F1 content. If you're picking us up somewhere else, also cool. Just hit us up with a 5-star review. Unlapped is back every single week. It is also presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Sir, see you in a week.
See you then.